Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of Tier 5 Let's Talk. And today we have with us Arjun Narayan, co-founder and CEO of Materialize. Arjun, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, since you are a co-founder of the company, so tell us a bit about the company. What do you folks do, and what specific problem that you wanted to solve for the ecosystem that you co-created the company?
Materialize is a company that builds a real-time database, also called Materialize, in the cloud for all of your real-time needs. It's a fully consistent distributed SQL database. The unique aspect of Materialize is that it is designed to give you answers to complex analytics queries in milliseconds or tens of milliseconds. So it's usable in your production applications and for a variety of use cases like online machine learning prediction or just more up-to-date analytics that currently people resort to batch pipelines for.
If I ask you, if you look at data creation or consumption, would you like categorize in two different buckets? One is that, hey, there is a need for real-time streaming data, and then there is also data that can just sit in a data lake or wherever it is. You pull some analytics once in a while, or you use it once in a while. So can you talk about, is there any real difference or really not?
Yeah, so I actually think that today there is a very large difference between batch and real time. And I would also argue that this is an artificial distinction that has been imposed by limitations of the tools that we use. So today, for instance, if you are okay with batch, you have a variety of amazing productivity tools, right? So you can just write SQL queries. These are simple to write. They're easy to orchestrate. And under the hood, you get this amazing advantage of these scale out distributed batch cloud data warehouses that do all the heavy lifting for you. So as a productivity experience for the developer, this is a wonderful world. The only downside is that it's slow, right? So you typically run these pipelines once a day. Now, if you actually have a hard requirement for low latency, you're sort of thrown out into this wild west where you have to build and deploy these complex microservices, worry about correctness, build and deploy Kafka clusters, manage all of these things manually. And this is a very high bar. And as a result, a lot of people sort of look at it and they go, I don't really need, or I can real time, or I can live with batch. I can live with some of this latency because I just don't have the ability to hire, 10 developers, put them on an all-call rotation in perpetuity to manage these 3 microservices. And of course, people do that for some critical use cases. And this is mostly because the existing tools in real time and in streaming are so limited. They don't offer full SQL. They do not offer an out-of-the-box, fully consistent, strongly consistent experience. And that's really what Materialize is about. It's about bringing to streaming what people take as table stakes in the batch ecosystem.
So what you're saying is that the usage, consumption, or popularity, it has nothing to do with the use case. It's more about the limitations of either the tools or the teams. Is that what you're saying? If you remove those limitations, do you think that real time will kind of become default?
Yes, I believe real time will be the default, not the exception. And this will happen when real-time databases are as easy to use as batch. If it was the same price, it was the same ease, and everything was faster, everyone would choose it.
Right. So we talked about, the limitation, of course, you talk about Materialize. There are a lot of players, so they must be doing things. So can you talk about what efforts, what projects, what products are already there, and where do they feel that teams still resort to batch processing instead of real time?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of technologies in order to build stream processing. For instance, Apache Kafka, Apache Flink. These are widely deployed at scale in production stream processors. What they do, however, require is manual use, right? So you do not get the same experience of you write a declarative SQL query. And many of these have SQL-like user interfaces on top of the underlying stream processor, but these aren't the same depth and breadth of SQL support that is offered in the batch ecosystem, right? So take, for instance, a modern cloud data warehouse like Snowflake or Redshift. The kind of SQL that you can write is, say, 14-way join with 3 subqueries. Like these cloud data warehouses eat that for breakfast without even breaking a sweat. The SQL builders that you get on top of modern stream processing pipelines are a lot more limited in their functionality. And I would argue, and at Materialize, we really care about that former SQL, the full breadth and depth of SQL that people are used to writing it at the cloud data warehouse level.
As you were alluding to that earlier, the developers, if I ask you, are there specific either use cases or industries where real time makes more sense versus batch, or and if those are, what are those?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes these technology waves, they proceed with a few Silicon Valley companies at the cutting edge. So for instance, I would argue that a company like Uber or a company like Lyft has been built from the ground up on top of real-time technologies, and these are the most sophisticated users of real-time technologies, right? So when you pull up your Uber app, it shows you exactly where the car is. It shows you exactly what the price is. That price has been calculated on a real-time, very low latency basis, right? That's how they do surge pricing. That's how they do multipliers. Of course, for a company like Uber, they have the resources to build and deploy tens, if not hundreds of microservices, if not thousands of microservices, and staff them and keep them on on-call rotations. And they built all of these manually. But we believe that every company should have the ability to build a real-time experience that, with real-time personalization in e-commerce, with real-time dynamic pricing or advertisement, not just the few companies that are able to build and staff complex microservices.
I want to talk about one more. It's not an emerging technology. It's been around for a while, but we hear a lot about it these days, which is edge computing. And with the arrival of 5G, especially private networks, where you can speed up things, you have more control. Do you think that real-time processing will make more sense, or it's like really more realistic? They're also at edge. You really, literally, because of latency, a lot of reasons you cannot send things back and forth. You do have to make a lot of decisions in the real time at the edge itself.
Yeah, so a lot of these edge computing devices do send a lot of data back, right? So the analytics problem becomes harder as you deploy more and more compute in general. Just your data sizes get larger. It's been over a decade since the big data fad was what everybody talked about. But if anything, the data has only gotten bigger. The analytics problems have only gotten more complex, and we're definitely seeing 5G cause an even larger increase in the amount of data that is generated.
Let's go back to the very beginning of our discussion where we're talking about real-time data. If I ask you, how would you define real-time or streaming database?
I would define that as one that is built from the ground up on stream processing primitives, is able to do incremental computation that doesn't throw out the results of the previous computation and then recompute from scratch, because that's simply not viable as a strategy for handling real-time data.
And as we were talking once again, you were talking about limitations. If given the chance to use real-time data or streaming database, can you talk about when they should kind of lean towards it? What kind of applications will benefit more from real-time data?
I think we can put them in sort of three buckets. I think the first one was just say core application development, right? So applications, OLTP databases have always been real-time, right? Like if you're using Postgres or MySQL, when your application hits that database, it expects a response within milliseconds, so it can get back to the user. But it's just when you have a data-intensive application that no longer fits in an OLTP usage paradigm, and it's more of an OLAP usage paradigm, there isn't really a good fit for that in the batch workloads. And you need a streaming database for that. The second one I would say is online machine learning prediction, right? So using Materialize as a real-time feature store, you can take the signals that you want to use to tune and give personalized results on a user-by-user basis. And then the third one is just making your analytics pipeline faster, right? So that one's usually the one that people see because it's the devil it's the batch pipeline that is too slow, that is slowing down your business, and you just want that to be much faster because you have, say, customer service agents or humans who are being slowed down by the fact that they don't have the most up-to-date data in front of them when making a decision.
I want to talk about a cultural question as well, as developers mostly are used to batch processing. So culturally also you feel that there are some changes needed either within organizations or we talk about DevOps culture, DevOps. So what is needed there also so that folks not only should also look at solutions that are out there, because sometimes because of these limitations they don't even look, and of course structurally also they are used to the. So talk about what cultural changes are needed so that folks can leverage these solutions as well.
This is a great question because I see one big cultural problem, which is that there's uh, this gap between the folks who build and operate the real-time production systems and the folks who leverage cloud data warehouses and modern batch tools to get things done for their business, right? So there's oftentimes these are in two different parts of the org. They don't really talk to each other. The data teams that surface insights in batch have a hard time having these put into production because it would involve so much more re-engineering in order to build and ship a microservice that incorporates something that fundamentally is just a SQL query. And at Materialize, what we really want to do is to bridge this gap, right? We want to give the data teams the tools that they can use to put in production using just SQL, right? So there's many microservices that began their life as an insight that was just a SQL query. And our argument is you should be able to just take that SQL query and put that into production without needing to traverse this cultural boundary to the production scenes.
And since we're talking about cultural aspect, I also want to, since you're here, is that what advice you would give that when they do approach real-time streaming databases, which is a bit different, from batch processing, the things are. So what advice do you have when they kind of look towards embracing it?
I would actually say that the data teams, we love the cultures of the data teams where they're fundamentally focused on solving business problems and are focused on getting value out of their systems. I would say don't get bogged down in building and orchestrating complex streaming data pipelines. You don't need to change the way you think. The way you think in SQL and it is very productive and very valuable. You should expect more from your tools so that they meet you where you are. So that you can take that SQL query and put it into a real-time production pipeline and stay lean and stay productive.
Since we're talking about the cultural aspect and dev teams, how have you seen the evolution of data engineers? How different, because when we talk data scientists, and this is also a breed which is even harder to find. There is a big gap in supply and demand of tech people already, and data folks are even harder to get. All those big companies, they take all the folks that come out. So talk about how would you define data engineers in today's world, and what kind of trend you're seeing in this space?
Yeah, I would say the biggest trend is the rise of the analytics engineer, right? Which is analysts who are improving their skills and becoming closer to data engineers. Traditionally, you would see this big split between data engineers and analysts, right? And analysts would only interface with data via, say, a BI tool like a Looker or a Tableau, and the data engineers would build these pipes to fuel these Looker and Tableau. And this is merging into this analytics engineer who are able to both build and maintain these pipelines as using wonderful tools like dbt and directly on the cloud data warehouses, and it's no longer this big split. And primarily this is happening because these analysts are being empowered by modern and better tooling to be able to do some of the data engineering work. So it's really just it's a rising tide that allows more to get done across an organization that isn't so bottlenecked on these few data engineers, as you rightly pointed out, are the supply demand mismatch is vast. So I would say that that's a wonderful trend that I expect to continue. I think analysts should not be afraid to I guess pick up the keyboard and start writing some DBT models and building those pipelines themselves, orchestrating them. That's a wonderful trend that I think absolutely should continue, and one that vendors should embrace to build databases that are more approachable by these analytics engineers.
Since the early days of cloud native AWS, we started talking about the whole DevOps culture where things were moving shift. A lot of things are moving into the devs pipeline. So what kind of evolution of data engineer, data scientists, and developer you're seeing? Because as much as we like to look at unicorn developers, the fact is there are some fields which are much more specialized. Security is one, databases, there are a lot of other areas. So there will always be, we can use the word silos or soft silos, where there will still be team who will be responsible for that. So how do you look at the evolution of this aspect from that perspective?
Yeah, there's definitely there's always specialization is always going to be valued. I think there's always going to be more specializations. In particular, say in machine learning, right? You still see that there is a strong specialization and a bit of a gap between machine learning, data science versus traditional analytics or analytics engineering that is more SQL. You see this, Python SQL split that I don't necessarily think will be closed anytime soon or needs to be closed. I think these are both valuable specializations and specialties that can both thrive.
So the fact is that there will be teams, developers will be there, database engineers will be there. So talk about how do these different teams or many teams with the same organizations, they look at Materialize, or how do you help them? Because when you look at them one kind of customer, one user. So talk about that aspect also.
Yeah, and so a big part of our culture at Materialize is to meet our users where they are, right? So at Materialize, we make a great deal of effort to be a Postgres compatible database. Postgres is a database that all of these teams know and love and have used at various points in their time. So that standards compliance is a huge part of what makes Materialize or any other database usable and approachable in a plug and play fashion. I think this is something that users are going to expect more and more, and they should. That they shouldn't have to rebuild the entire architecture around a single vendor's product. That they should be free to choose the best tool for each and every job, and that the databases are truly standards compliant. I think that's a big thing that we bring to the streaming ecosystem is we're the first streaming database that is Postgres compatible to a level that we would say stands up to the best batch databases.
Can you talk about what solutions you are actually offering to organizations?
So Materialize, we believe, is the best way to get started with streaming. If you're a batch team that has so far hesitated from going to streaming because you see a lot of complexity, you have to set up all this infrastructure, these Kafka topics, Materialize is the fastest way to prototype and get to a fully real-time experience using just the SQL that you already know, that you're already experienced with. And we'd encourage you to start there to build your very first streaming data pipeline.
Can you also talk about if there is any open source angle to Materialize as well?
Yeah, and this is really the foundation of our company. So Materialize is a source available database. You can see all of our code on GitHub, and it's built on top of an open source stream processor, Timely Data Flow, that was invented by my co-founder, Frank McSherry. It's at the heart of everything we do. We strongly believe that the best new infrastructure technologies are going to have their source available for developers to see. It makes for a better user experience as well as a better experience for the entire community.
Arjun, thank you so much for taking time out today and not only talk about the company, but also share your insights about real-time databases, streaming databases, and the importance, and also that, they should be default, not exception. It's just the limitation of existing tools, but that's the problem Materialize is solving there. So thanks for sharing those insights as well. And I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swapnil. It was really wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for all those questions. I'd love to be back.